So, the Green Bone Saga. It has taken booktube by storm. You see it everywhere on booktube. It's one of booktube's favorite books. And I'm here to tell you the truth about this series. And the truth about this series is, it's excellent and one of the best modern fantasy trilogies that I've read. I'm here in case you missed the first 20 or so videos about this series that are on booktube. And if you have not heard that it is a fantastic secondary world urban fantasy, which I actually think this might be the first secondary world urban fantasy I've read, in that this is a series that is set on a world that is clearly based on Earth, but it is still like a completely secondary world. This isn't an urban fantasy that's like the underground of Earth that's like hidden. It's just a completely different world, and it is mostly focused around the city of Janloon. It's kind of would be based on like late mid 1900 tech, maybe mid 1900 tech. So it's not like people have like cell phones or internet, but there are like cars and guns, and they had their equivalent of World War II, and this is after their equivalent of World War II, and you know, kind of like Cold War period. And in the city of Janloon, they have a monopoly. It is the only place where you can get jade, which is a magical substance. Now, most people cannot use jade, but the people who can use jade can get, you know, superpowers and stuff, which came from Fonda Lee being like, hey, those kung fu movies or like martial arts movies where the people do like completely unrealistic stunts and like jump through windows and like kick over cars and stuff like that and jump 20 feet in the air. That looks fun. I'm gonna try and make that internally consistent. And so that's fun. And generally we are following, like the characters you're following follow a gang. And basically the city of Janloon, it has like two government structures. It has a somewhat normal government, and then it also has Green Bone families who actually have like official power. It's not like they're gangs that you would think of in our world that work underground. It's kind of like, you know, when the Green Bones show up fighting, it's like, no, police, you don't bother with this. They're allowed to be killing each other. This is a thing they do. And there are a number of gangs around, like in the country and around their main city of Janloon, but there are two that are by far the most powerful who are roughly equal in power, and that's the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan. And we are going to follow the No Peak clan for this series. That's where our protagonist is going to come from. If you've seen the bookmarks with the characters, they're from the No Peak clan. Sup Lan, sup Shay, you're both great. Just in the past decade or so, the clans have been on somewhat friendly terms, because in this world's equivalent of World War II, Janloon and Kekon was invaded, but despite being wildly outnumbered, mainly due to having magical warriors who can, you know, deflect bullets and beat the shit out of people, the two clans generally work together. And so the two, like the grandparents of the characters you follow, like their grandparent has been the leader of the clan or the pillar, and they have gotten along relatively well with who used to be the leader of the Mountain clan. And the Mountain clan is the Antagonist clan, who you're cheering against. But sometimes they do kind of have a point. But they still are definitely the antagonists. The Mountain clan has had a change in leadership, and the people are very concerned about it. And for the No Peak clan has also recently had a change of leadership. That's kind of how the series starts, is it's a passing of the guard, except the old, like, grandfather who used to be in charge of the clan is still alive and kind of, like, doesn't do that much, like, isn't leading, but is kind of doing the thing where he was the leader for so long that when the current leader, like Lan, takes over, called Lan in Chapter 1, is the pillar of No Peak. But when he wants to do something, you kind of see how having this shadow over them in his grandfather really makes it much harder for him to run the clan in a good way and the way he would like to. And you see the majority of the conflict, especially in Jade City, it takes place in the two clans either directly fighting each other or kind of fighting each other by proxy, where it's like they're not just warrior institutions, the clans are also economic institutions, and it's like they'll try and like sabotage each other's investments as well as, stabby. And that's kind of what it's about. It's following an intergenerational conflict between two magic-fueled clans over the years. And it's, in my opinion, really interesting. It's really handled well, I think. And it is, in general, a very character-driven story. I would be considered a family drama where the interactions and relationships and decisions that the people in this family or directly surrounding this family make is what ends up driving the majority of the conflict or the plot. But that is kind of what it's about. But what is it actually like to read? So if I were to describe what it's like to read The Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee, I would say it is a series that has medium pacing. These are neither thriller speed pacing, like that you're not going to see Dresden speed pacing, but I don't think you could also realistically call any of them a slow burn. They're kind of like early Stormlight books, early A Song of Ice and Fire books, maybe Age of Madness trilogy style pacings, where you're not like, oh my god, this is like stuff that's happening so fast. But it's also not like you're gonna be spending an entire book doing one thing. They do end up being very eventful books. There's definitely a lot of stuff happens. It's kind of just middle of the line for that, and the prose is kind of similar. It's probably more towards the straightforward side of the spectrum, but it also isn't completely all the way over towards the straightforward style of the spectrum. I would say the prose is, it was not a series where I was frequently just being like, wow, like Fonda Lee is a wordsmith, that's what makes me enjoy this book. But I would say it isn't, and it's not particularly dense, but I also don't think it's ever particularly clunky, and I also never feel like the writing is dry or dull. It's kind of rides the middle of that road, I think, pretty well. And I will say, I think there are some authors who take a little bit of time to kind of find the writing voice they want. I did not think that about Greenbone. I think the writing style and prose was extremely consistent throughout, and I really enjoyed that about it. I also would say, in terms of like how you root through people and the series, this is not a series where you have one side that are clearly the good guys and one side that are clearly the bad guys. There aren't really good guys and bad guys, but not in the grimdark sense. Like, I've read some books where there are no good guys and no bad guys because everyone is a bad guy. In this, it's just that both sides clearly have flaws and things that they do that are bad and things that they have done that are morally questionable. And both sides also have good aspects out of them, and at times have good motives, and are doing good things. Like, this is not a series where it's nihilistic about human nature, but it's also not a series where anyone is going to be, like, twirling their mustache. So it's kind of for, like, the pacing, the writing, and the kind of morality, it's not on any of the extremes for any of those. It kind of fits the nice middle for a lot of them, and I think it all suits the series really well, and is one of the reasons I enjoyed it. Moving on to something else, for the reading experience, Jade Legacy, I think, is a very different reading experience than even Jade War, but especially Jade City. Jade City is very focused on the micro conflict. It covers much less time. It covers much less characters. A lot of the chapters is, all right, so we have these problems. How are we going to specifically overcome these problems? And watching characters try and like overcome more clear goals. There's more for the entire book, more like clear, like, okay, this character has this problem. They need to try and overcome this problem. And then Jade Legacy, it expands so much in time scale and also in amount of characters that in general, the story it's telling is trying to get much more focused on like the macro conflict. You still get micro stuff. It's kind of this. The only thing I can think of that's similar to it, which is unfortunately not going to be useful for everyone because not everyone has read the series, but a lot of people has, is Stormlight flashbacks. If you think to like the Kaladin flashbacks or the Shallan flashbacks, you will generally get, I mean, even if I don't compare this to Stormlight, I can still just describe how it works. Most of the scenes in Jade Legacy show you an element of someone doing something in the micro, small scale. Like, there's not going to be a chapter that covers months at a time. When you get a chapter, it'll cover, like, a day or a few hours, and it'll show some smaller aspect. And due to some kind of black magic fuckery, this all combines and gives you a very good idea of what's happening in the large scale, and gives you an excellent idea of the overall story while also letting the character shine, which is actually something I think about Jade Legacy that I've mentioned before, is that I kind of wish it was 400,000 words. There are some characters who I felt I wanted more in between chapters, where I would have really just liked to see their entire, like, development almost, like, more micro-focused. I only really thought that for the middle of the book, though. I think it's kind of rare to be like, yeah, the problem with the middle of this book is I thought it was too short. Most people generally are more likely to say it was too long. But I'm someone who, you can take that with a huge grain of salt, because in general, if you think of fantasy books that are regularly criticized for being too long, I probably don't think it's too long. I probably actually think that if it was shorter, I would enjoy it less. This is really common for fantasy books, so it's probably the reverse for Jade Legacy. Most people seem to think that it's about the perfect length, while I would have liked it to be longer. If there was like a Stan-style extended cut edition in 10 years that was 400,000 words, I would read the shit out of that. It's not gonna happen because generally editions like that are because the author wrote a 400,000 word book and then the publisher was like, we can't sell a 400,000 word book, and so then they cut things. This is Fonda Lee didn't write a 400,000 word book, so it's ridiculous for me to be like, hey Fonda Lee, because me and no one else would like another 150,000 words, can you please write it for me? So that's not going to happen. But in general, you can expect in Jade Legacy for the kind of style of the story to be much more focused on just like what's going on in the characters' lives in general and the macro story of the entire family, and less focused on like, okay, we have Hilo. Hilo has this specific problem, like the mountain horn is infringing on the territory, or like deliberately setting it up so it looks like No Peak is infringing on their territory. How is he going to solve this problem? Then he'll either, he'll try and maybe he'll fail and maybe he'll succeed. Jade Legacy is extremely different than that, and even Jade War is to a less extent. Jade War already expands the scale and number of characters by quite a bit, and then Jade Legacy does it even more, which, I mean, might be a reason why they're better in my opinion. But I think I would say the actual biggest reason why I like, if you look on Goodreads for me, Jade War is 5 stars, Jade Legacy is 5 stars, and Jade City is only 4, is because I think Fonda Lee improved at writing human emotions and making shocking or emotional moments more emotionally impactful. I think Jade City, in terms of the characters, were excellent in terms of they were all extremely well realized. They all had like a distinct personality. They all saw the world in a distinct way. They had a distinct voice. But where it didn't succeed as much from a character perspective, from my experience, is that there were shocking moments that I felt could have been extremely emotionally impactful that were not as emotionally impactful. And books 2 and 3 essentially completely solve that issue. Both of those, the moments that should have been emotionally impactful were extremely emotionally impactful, especially Jade Legacy, where I think she improved it again. And it's why, even though I've said I think Jade Legacy, I would like it more if it was 150,000 words longer, it still is my favorite in the series because of that emotional impact and also just general consistency. One other thing I could have, that this time we're getting really into nitpicking territory, but I think it's worth noting. If you, if you've been paying attention to booktube, there's this whole show versus tell thing, and pointing out that, for the vast majority of authors, the normal thing to do is some combination of showing and telling. in terms of delivering world building, Fonda Lee probably, especially front loads more with the telling, which is one reason it's not particularly dense, which this isn't a, like, particularly rare amount of telling. This is just, like, it's not Malazan or, like, Dune, but what is Malazan or Dune? And one thing I would say, and this is, again, a good problem to have, is sometimes Fonda Lee again has the reverse problem of some other authors. I have encountered authors before who just like don't tag their dialogue or just say this person said, this person said, this person said, and I just don't end up not thinking their dialogue is good enough for that to carry conversations. Fonda Lee, I think, has the opposite problems, where I actually think her dialogue is very good. One thing she's extremely good at is having people's like social position and just position relative to each other to impact the dialogue. So, for example, if you have Lan, who is the pillar, having a conversation for someone who works for No Peak, you could tell, even if you remove the names, that Lan is the person's boss, even if he's being completely respectful. Like, he's not, like, lording his power over someone or abusing his power. You can just tell because of how it's written. And I think sometimes I want Fonda Lee to be more confident in her dialogue. She's not. She frames her dialogue like she has more stuff in her dialogue, which is, in general, maybe the style I sometimes like more. You'll see this a lot in Hobb dialogue, where it's like, you know, this person said this, and as they said it, like, they looked at me in this certain way or whatever. And I felt sometimes she was able to convey something very clearly in the dialogue, and then the framing of the dialogue just reaffirmed what she'd already communicated effectively, which wouldn't be a problem if she wasn't a good dialogue writer, but that sometimes it would just rendered some framing of dialogue that felt obsolete to me. Here we're getting nitpicky, but it's something you can expect now, I guess, but I still, you know, think that it's extremely good. And one other thing to mention, I know this affects, like, people want to know this, is that I would say Fonda Lee is not a fan of fading to black for sex scenes. So if you're listening to an audiobook, not with earbuds, but out loud in public spaces, I would advise caution. And further, one thing I want to mention that I think the series does really well is its antagonists, which it has a few, like, smaller antagonists, but it really has two, like, main antagonists, and one is, like, the obvious person you'd expect, like the pillar of the mountain, who's like really threatening and a layered character, and at times you're like, okay, this person kind of has a point, but then they're also flawed and complicated, but extremely threatening. And then there's an antagonist who's like a cockroach, who just will not die, and is just someone that is super hateable. I will say, I think even the hateable one managed to be a dynamic character with well-written motivations and everything like that, but definitely the two, you see both different styles of antagonists. The one who you kind of understand where they're coming from, and the one who, if they lived in real life, you would risk jail time in order to murder. Your Kyle Haven style, although I think similar to Kyle Haven, I think both are extremely well-written. And I think my plan is, I'm trying this for the series review. I'm just only doing the reading experience. I think it's the better part of the reviews, and I'm starting to think that talking about the characters and plotting and world building and theme and action and theme in specific sections is just not worth the time. So let me know. I always think this is the most important part of the review, where I am able to communicate the most important information, and then the rest of the thing is just me being like, it's good or it's bad. If you want to know whether I think something is good or bad, you can look at my Goodreads review, or probably assume that I think it's good, considering I gave 2 out of the 3 books 5 stars, and the other one a high 4 stars. But yeah, that is all I got for the Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee. If you're a fan of modern fantasy, I would read this book. I think it's excellent. It is, yeah, it's one of the best modern fantasy trilogies I have read. Let me know what you think in the comments, or if you have or are planning to read the Green Bone Saga, which was a series that I would say lived up to the hype for me. I think Fonda Lee's an excellent character writer. There's very little fat for the plotting. The world is interesting. I don't think the world building is like S tier or like 10 out of 10. I especially have curiosities to how there was like, how Jade is kind of balanced in the 1900s, because people have guns. So it's obvious how Kikon hasn't established like an empire with their Jade because guns. I'm kind of curious how that worked in like the Middle Ages, but that doesn't really matter. That's just me being the uber fantasy nerd who's just like, I want all the things. My guess is it is just that even in the Middle Ages, there was kind of a stalemate between dominant kind of clans in the Middle Ages who like canceled each other out. That's probably the explanation. But in general, it's excellent. You should probably read it.